Conversation, okay?
That sounds good.
And yes, I think we are live. I'm here with my new friend Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Nice to
Thanks
meet
for
you.
inviting me on. I'm actually, yeah, I'm very impressed. I looked at some of the people you've had on your show, and I hope you're not hitting like the bottom because you asked me
No,
on.
no, 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 no. I have all kinds of guests, and it's not necessarily the big names that are the best guests. Trust me. It's the regular folk.
Yeah, but yeah, you've gotten a lot of interesting people. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's great to come across your podcast, and I'm glad to be able to chat with you tonight.
Yeah, well, I mean, I discovered you on Twitter because of your beautiful illustrations, Catholic illustrations. We're going to get into that. We are going to get into that. I'm excited to hear about that. I'm something of a creative sort myself. But first, I want you to take us back to your
Nice.
childhood and how you were raised, and your religious experience as a very young child, all the way up until today. Just sort of summarize, hit the key points of the highlight along the way.
Yeah, sure. It's a very convoluted story, and it seems like every time I get asked to tell it, I tell it a little bit differently. So I'll try and hit like some of what I think were like the peak moments. I mean, growing up, we considered ourselves Bible Christians. If you know that term, I mean, we were essentially fundamentalists. We were Protestants, but we never thought of ourselves as a Protestant. We didn't know what would have been protesting to begin with, because we really didn't know anything about Catholicism. And so you need to have that absolute if you're protesting something. So, but we didn't have that. So, you know, we just thought, somewhere along my family line, they picked up this Christianity stuff, and it all, came down to the fact that we had a Bible, and we were supposed to encounter Jesus through that. And if we felt like we reached that certain age of reason where we felt like we were being called to a life in Jesus, then we would simply say a almost like a initiation creed, where I don't know if I can even remember it now, but it's something to the effect of I believe in Jesus in my heart. I confess him with my lips. I ask him to come into my heart as my Lord and Savior. And bam, that's like baptism in that tradition. And so from that moment on, we would have considered ourselves saved. Now, when you're a kid, you kind of go with that stuff. And we had a little bit of a rough upbringing because we were a military family. I know you're Canadian, so I don't know how that is up there, but here in the U.S., like we move every year or two, depending on what branch of the military and the specific job. And so my dad was moving every year or two. Sometimes he was gone for 6 months, sometimes a year. And that created a lot of chaos and friction in our house. And so it became this really weird dichotomy of being like this place where we professed to be Christians, but we didn't really have any Christian culture within our family. We didn't have any practices. We didn't live liturgically. And at the same time, we weren't very much living like Christians either. I mean, sometimes we went to church on Sundays. And that's another thing with the military life, is that we would move to a new city, and we would just, I don't know how my parents would find a church. They'd open the yellow pages perhaps, or they heard from word of mouth about a good church that was down the street. It's very interesting because we went to so many different types of churches in that time. Never once did we go to a Catholic church. Never once did we even think of entertaining it, which tells me, especially as I got older, that, okay, we kind of had them reserved into some compartmentalized place over there with Mormons and other cults. That's because I did think that maybe Catholics worshipped Mary. I somehow picked that up. But I never had a Catholic friend or anything growing up to teach me otherwise. And so I'm going off on a ramble there, and I forget what I was going with that. But yeah, so we went
You were
to a lot
talking
of
about
different churches.
Sunday
Never once, that's what it
military
was. We
life.
never,
Military life in the Sunday obligation wasn't really respected in the military life. You were trying to draw that connection out a little bit. I think that's what you were saying.
that's right. Yeah. 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 That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So we never would have thought to go to a Catholic church. And, we'd go to these churches sometimes on Sunday, but it was very casually. I would say we were very much nominal Christians. And because of all the friction and chaos in the house, it seemed like we were kind of living a lie too. And I started to really, as I got closer to my teenage years, say, we say we're Christians and that we live like Jesus, but like, look how we're acting. Like, look at the fights and the things that are going on in this house. And it was really tough for me as a child. Actually, it's something that kind of, I think, pushed me into the dark, some dark places in my teenage years, just because of all the fights and things between my parents and all of that chaos. And then, moving every year or two when you're a kid, especially when you're in high school, you're trying to make a group of friends, and then all of a sudden you get ripped up, you get put into another location, and then it's like now you're the new kid again, and you don't really have the time to build a good community. So who did I gravitate to? I gravitated to the people that had no standards, the people that would accept anybody, who was, as long as you didn't, have some kind of absolute belief yourself, anything went. And so, because this was the late 80s, 90s, I was really a product of the MTV sort of generation, and music and that whole culture and that lifestyle, like that started to be where the influence was. And this Christianity stuff I grew up with was like, what is this? I mean, this isn't even, where did the Bible even come from? So I started to have questions like that. Like, if you're going to tell me that this is what I have to base my life on, where did this Bible come from? How do you know that what it says in the Bible is actually what we're supposed to live out, what we're supposed to believe? Why do you interpret it that way? And I didn't even know there were different interpretations of the Bible at that time. So that linchpin would come many years later. But so these sort of questions really started to pop up, and living that hedonistic. And I went full atheist. I just rejected Christianity. Said, this is just a lie. This is a joke. And of course, in the culture, you see Christianity portrayed on TV and in movies, and it's the joke. It's American Protestantism, and it's superficial, and it's just a veneer. And so I cracked that veneer, and I said, well, there's nothing underneath of it. So I want to go headlong into this culture hedonistic stuff. And so that's what I did. And I was a very miserable person for really all my teenage years. And I got myself into a lot of trouble, and that eventually ran me straight into a wall where I wasn't really, I was like I had nothing, and I was broken down. And this was years of living like this, and saying that I rejected Christianity. And it was, I don't know what it was. When I was young, we did have these occasions, especially when my father was gone and it was my mother watching me and my brothers. We lived in some pretty bad places sometimes, and there were like times where people would be trying to break into our house, and so my mom would like teach us to pray for protection. And so when I was young, I did have this strong connection to angels and like some kind of guardian protection. And I saw some things happen that I was like, later in life, I'm like, wow, that was just me being a kid. I mean, what do I know? But at this moment, years later, when I was in this complete misery that I'd created for myself, I found myself falling back on prayer. And I was really a lonely person. And I was really looking for someone to spend my life with. And I found that I was kind of raised, because my parents said that we were Christian, although we weren't really living it that well. We still had that sort of Puritanism that you find in a lot of fundamentalist Protestant sects. And so, we weren't supposed to listen to the music I was listening to. We weren't supposed to watch the movies I was watching. And everything was about like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And so, at a very young age, I couldn't listen to a lot of different music, but I would listen to like oldies. And because my mom didn't have a problem with that, I mean, that's kind of like the stuff she grew up with. So I would listen to oldies on the radio when I was a real little kid. And what really attracted me back in those days was, that I remember, was so much of the music was about like courting and marriage. And so I thought, oh, okay, this is kind of like the one place where I was getting some kind of normalcy. And I thought, well, I need to find that person in my life, because I want to find this person I can spend my life with. That one person. I just wanted the one person. And so that never came about for years. And I had nothing to offer anybody that would have even been half interested in me, because I was such a miserable wretch. I found myself praying, and I prayed that, God, if you were there, please, lead me to somebody. And through a series of unbelievable miracles, my wife came into my life at that time. And I completely attribute it to this. You look back over the years and you can see how God has worked through your life in different ways. I didn't see it at the time. I didn't even know that I was about to become a Catholic. That's where I was headed. I didn't know she was Catholic until we met. And we met online. So the first time that we met in person, she said, well, I have to go to Mass. Well, this is the first time I had ever heard about this. We never discussed it in like over I don't know, a year or two of talking to each other from a distance. And so I was like, well, I don't know what that is, but I'm not going to wait in the car. I mean, if you're going, and I was completely like head over heels for her. I was like, I'm fine. I'll go and I'll sit there just to be with her, right? And it was fine. Like nobody accosted me. Nobody, asked me what I was doing there, dressed like that or looking the way I looked back then. And so I thought, okay, well, this is interesting. And I kind of like just faked it for years. She would go every Sunday. And we were, of course, living a very superficial, just chasing excitement and that sort of life. And but on Sundays, she'd go to church and she would pray her rosary every day. So those are the two things that she retained. And so I did that with her for years. And when I met her parents, that was interesting. So they're from the Middle East. And so I eventually met her parents. We decided to get married, and they said they wanted, she wanted a Catholic wedding. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll become Catholic. Well, I didn't know what I didn't believe anything at the time. It wasn't like that one prayer I had years ago had like sunk in and I was praying daily or anything. I wasn't praying at all. And I said, okay, well, fine. So I went through all the catechism classes and things, but going over to her parents' house was always interesting because one of the things I rejected about my very American Protestantism, one of the questions that my parents really couldn't ask was, why do you assume that because you've said this one sentence about accepting Jesus into your heart that like you're going to be saved, but all these other people are just destined for hell that haven't even heard of Jesus? Like it's not even reasonable. I mean, and now that have a little bit more study on these things, it's almost like a sort of Calvinism where these people are just created to be lost, and it didn't make sense to me. And when I met her, because they were from the Middle East, her parents had a lot of Catholic art in their house, and it had Arabic script on it. So I started to make this connection that, oh, okay, there's more Christianity than just this American stuff I had grown up with. And this is very interesting. There's like these cultures that are embracing Christianity. Well, where'd that come from? And that started to get me digging into history. Like, okay, well, where did these people learn Christianity? Well, now that I know all this stuff, I'm like, we were the latecomers in America. The people over there in the Middle East, they had it from the beginning, right? So the Lebanese, the Maronites, they were there since the beginning. And so that was fascinating to me. And I thought, okay, well, there's some history here. And that convinced me to at least pursue it. And I remember asking my mother-in-law one day, well, who was the Pope? Because I remembered things about the Pope. Sinead O'Connor just died. And one of the things I remember was her ripping that photo. But I didn't really understand those sorts of things. I just saw that the Pope was occasionally on media and he would be mocked and ridiculed. And he was kind of like a joke. And so it was a weird thing. But I'm like, well, who was the first Pope? And when she told me Peter, that answered one of the other questions for me, which was, how did we get here 2,000 years after Jesus apparently lived, and we have a Bible and Christianity? Like, where's all the middle story? Like, what is all that? My parents could never answer that. And sure enough, this was the one thing that probably set me off more than anything, because I recognized the name Peter just from my casual knowledge of the Bible growing up. And I thought, well, that's actually true. That really demands some research. Like, you guys are claiming it, like you all seem sane to me. So I'm going to dig into this and see if this is actually the case. And I was thoroughly convinced. Once I got into the church fathers and you start to see how tradition was passed on and how it was preserved so carefully and so lovingly, it snowballed from there. And so there's a lot more to the story, but that's basically how the beginnings happened. And from there, I mean, it just set me on a path of just devouring every book I could find on Catholicism, and even things that were against Catholicism, because I didn't want to fall, like, we were raised as Protestants, and I didn't want to go through that again. I didn't want to be hoodwinked for some false religion. And I didn't know what I was going to do, because I was Catholic. I did get baptized. We did have a Catholic wedding. I mean, I was Catholic. So I was going to say, well, if this stuff isn't true, I'll just continue doing this stuff because it's important to my wife. But, what difference does it make? But I wanted it to make a difference, because I started to see truth there, and I saw so much lacking in the world. There's no truth in the world, and I was looking for it. I really was looking for it, and so that really kept me on fire through that process for a decade. I mean, I was just obsessed. I read everything I could. I listened to every single podcast I could find, every lecture, every talk. Scott Hahn's conversion story was given to me by my brother-in-law, and that just like, that was like my first realization of like the Holy Spirit in my life, because it just like overwhelmed me. Just listening to his story, it was like a switch flipped, and I was just not the same person anymore. So I had a really deep intellectual conversion. Many years later, we had 2 kids, and I thought I was living a pretty good Catholic life. I was going to church on Sunday. I somehow avoided going to my first confession when I went into the church. I mean, I was terrified of confession, and I snuck my way around that whole thing. I still got baptized and brought into the church. And I went, and I was living such a terrible life. Even after becoming Catholic, I had this rot and these barnacles on me from my life of hedonism. And it was eating away at me. And I knew I wasn't living like a Christian. I was not giving everything up for God. I was keeping one foot in both worlds. And so I finally pulled myself together and was like, well, I'm going to go to confession. So I did my first confession a number of years after becoming Catholic, which was just an amazing grace in my life. And I started to think things were changing. It's like, all right, I'm finally getting this stuff. And then I got really sick and found out that I had lung cancer when I was in my early 30s. And I had these 2 kids, and I had this whole faith. And now it was like, well, what happened? I thought I was doing everything right. So I kind of still had this Protestantism, like health and wealth mentality. I'm like, come on, God, like I was doing all the right stuff. Like, what happened? And I started to realize, oh, that's not Catholicism. That's not Catholicism. Catholicism is dying to yourself and being willing to die, to go to the end for Christ, and sacrifice yourself, complete surrender to divine providence and to his will. And in that trial, I became a lot like Jacob. I started to resonate with that story of Jacob and wrestling with the angel. Like, I was just wrestling with God. Like, why are you doing this to me? And I didn't know if I was going to make it out of it. And I just felt like everything was being snatched away from me. And I really wrestled with God, but I came out of it completely dead to myself and ready to just give him everything. And that's what got me started in art, because part of my recovery, it was cathartic for me just to kind of work through these ideas and through the beauty of the faith and try and find how it was that I was really, truly supposed to live out my Catholic faith. And so, I mean, that's really that's the short version. I know it was a long version in this interview, but that was intended to be the short version. But it was really three conversions. It was an openness to at least exploring Christianity again. It was the intellectual conversion, and then it was the spiritual conversion. And honestly, I think there might even be a 4th conversion for me, because I find that I'm still, I'm still going through my different struggles, but daily struggles of a different kind. And you never know what God has in store for you. So the Catholic life is definitely one of constant conversion. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that excellent summary. That we'll dig into some other little hidden nooks and crannies possibly. I wanted to ask about your siblings. Do you have any, or are you only child?
I did have 2. I do have 2 younger siblings. Unfortunately, just because of the dynamics of our family, we kind of when I turned old enough to move out, I kind of went my own way, and we don't, I talk to them maybe once a year, very briefly. So yeah, that's one of the unfortunate things that I lost, kind of, was a close relationship with them.
And the situation, like the fact that you're Catholic, it's not a topic of conversation with your parents or your 2 siblings at all. It's not a topic of conversation.
Oh, yeah. Not so much with my brothers. One of my brothers, I would kind of talk when I was really going through stuff, and I was like, "Did you know about this? Did you know about this?" And he was just thoroughly convinced that. I mean, I don't want to speak too much for him, but just he's told me he was thoroughly convinced that, like, the whole Constantine created the Catholic Church thing, like, he just couldn't get around that. Like, it was very difficult for him to do that. And I can, to a certain degree, I understand, like, some of this stuff is just going to be bizarre when you're coming from this American Protestantism, and you're not going to know what to do with it. And it's really grace that has to enlighten you to kind of see past some of the. I had one of those struggles with the myths, because I started to come across the ancient what do you call those? The mystery cults.
Yeah,
you know, I don't know if you ever saw that Zeitgeist film,
Yeah, yeah,
all that kind of garbage.
yeah.
And it really, this was years into my conversion, and it did start to shake me. And I'm like, oh, was this all just, so anyway, I had to work through that. And just to put a bow on that, I mean, I was thoroughly convinced at the end of that long process of grappling with that C.S. Lewis was absolutely dead on when he said that Catholic, or not, he wasn't Catholic, but Christianity was the true myth. And so all these other myths were kind of like these longings and groanings and echoes, like trying it's trying to echo the true myth. And so that really resonated with me, and that was finally settled. But anyway, you didn't ask about that, but it just came to my mind.
Have you read The City of God, St. Augustine's City of God?
City of God is one of those books that I've read here and there from time to time in pieces.
Okay.
It's one of the books that I've tried to read probably more than any other book and cannot. I just bought it because I used to try and read it online. I just bought it about a month ago, so I can start to try and read it again for like the 10th time.
I
so
recommend audiobook. I recommend the audiobook version of it. And I found an amateur reading online, but it was, it was pretty good. And it's just because it's a very meandering style, and there are a lot of tangents, and so you just have to treat it like The Young and the Restless. I don't know if you're not familiar with The Young and the Restless, but there's a lot of drama, a lot of like plot lines interwoven, and a lot of craziness. So you just need to soak it in and appreciate the nuggets, the little gems of beauty and weirdness, and it's just packed full of goodies. But it's not like something that you sit down and you read from cover to cover, and it's not a very linear thing. But there's so much goodness in it. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because he actually addresses not so much, well, I guess it is the myths of the Greco-Roman pantheons, and he just appropriates for Christianity everything that's good and true, like what Saint Justin Martyr said, that whatever's true belongs to us Christians. He does that in a very
that's right.
a very casual way. Saint Augustine in the City of God, he talks about the different gods, so-called, and he appropriates everything that's good and true about these gods, like to the extent, basically, like if there's no difference between some other myth and Christianity, then it's Christianity. And if there are differences,
that's right.
If there are differences, then it's different. You know what I mean? And the funny thing, the funny thing is, like, I mean, it sounds very simple to say it, but that's just a fact, And the thing is that there are that Satan loves to mimic God, and we're gonna have that that unholy trinity with the the Antichrist and all that sort of stuff. So Satan loves to mimic God with the Satanistic rituals that are very Catholic in nature, on the surface at least. And
this is one of it's sorry, there's a little bit of a lag, but that you're hitting something there that started to resonate with me too. I have people in my art, they'll approach me from time to time. They have this fundamentalist mentality, and they'll say, I just had somebody the other day criticizing me for putting a rainbow in my Assumption piece. And I'm like, you do realize God created light, right? Like, and who doesn't think a rainbow is beautiful? Like, don't give the devil that much credit. I've had people criticizing me for depicting St. Peter holding his cross upside down. I'm like, go read the history. Satan cannot invent these things. He's going to take what Christianity has, he's going to distort it and manipulate it. Stop giving ground to these people. And this is why my company's named Baritus, by the way, which means war cry, because like we got to start taking this stuff back.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you got baptized. Does that mean you didn't your fundamentalist upbringing didn't value the sacrament of baptism at all? Like they didn't baptize you?
No, I'm glad you asked that. No sacramental life, none. That one confession that we make, I said creed earlier, I was trying to think of the word. Confession, it's basically a confession that we believe in Christ. That was their sacrament.
Oh.
Now, I do remember going to some of the more mainline Protestant churches, from place to place as we grew up. I do remember being in like a I'm going to guess it was like a Presbyterian or something, because I think they have communion. But you know, they'd pass around the little trays with the grape juice and the cracker, and it was just symbolic. It was completely symbolic. And that was my favorite church, because it's like, oh, you get a snack in the middle of church. I had no idea why we were doing it. My parents didn't explain to me why we were doing it, and I was very young, so what did I know?
But doesn't the
But that was one
Bible
of the few times where there was even kind of like,
but doesn't the Bible talk explicitly
yep,
about baptism, like how it's necessary? Like, isn't that pretty obvious for the Protestants?
yes, yes, yes. It's mind-boggling. There's that. There's the John 6 discourse from Jesus. All of this stuff, like you just once you, and this is the thing, I would challenge anybody who's not Catholic, just pretend you're Catholic as an experiment. Try and read the Bible the way the Catholics do, and see if that makes more sense than all of the twisting and turning you're trying to do to make sense of these things. No, and it proves the point that we weren't really reading the Bible. Now that I'm Catholic and I realize that there's different translations and stuff, I'll also say we were reading a hideous translation growing up. I think it was like the New International or the something like that. And so, you know, some of that stuff even gets changed in the translation or hidden up, or, you know, when Jesus, I had a discussion with my mom, you did ask me, that was what you were asking me, is if I ever talked about Catholicism with my family. Me and my father kind of butted heads on it a little bit. And with my mom, she was open to listening, but she basically didn't want, I don't know why I explained the things to her, and she's like, well, that makes sense, but she's not going to go all the way with it. And I don't really know why that is. I can't speak for her. But I remember one time having a conversation with her where Jesus was talking to Nicodemus, and he says, you know, you must be born again of water and the Spirit. And I remember her saying, well, that I think I remember her. Maybe my memory's getting foggy now, but it was her or somebody else was saying, well, that just meant, you know, being born of the woman, your mother, and then being born again later once you accept Jesus. And so they'll always have some kind of way to get out of, you know, total assent to it. And I think a lot of times, you know, when I ask my parents or my brothers these questions, I don't think they know. I didn't know until I started reading Catholicism, like what all this stuff meant, where it came from. So,
If you don't mind, I'm going to sort of use you to just sort of bounce some ideas off you, because I made a lot of friends with my podcast. One of my most recent friends is Christopher Rice. He's a Protestant who's sort of exploring what is church and going back to the New Testament to get with fresh eyes to see what is church, what was the early church like, and these sorts of things. And he, you know, he's not Catholic, so he doesn't want to accept any Catholic distinctives until he's gone with his own fresh eyes back to the Old Testament writing, New Testament writings, to sort of figure out like what's the big picture in terms of church and these sorts of things. So it's a project that he's working on. I admire him for that, and he's open-minded, but he's not willing to sort of buy into any claims that are separate from the that can't be supported directly and obviously from the scriptures. So you know, that's his approach and that's his choice, you know. And but for you, you know, you were Protestant. I was Protestant too. I was born and raised Protestant. I lost my faith at age 14. But when I came back to Christianity, I knew enough about history and philosophy to know that the Catholic Church is the fullness of Christianity. So that's where I went. And it all had to do with the question of authority. And this is what I'm driving at here with you in my roundabout question. But my question is, he asked me, well, aren't you using, because I criticized Protestants for using private judgment with respect to interpreting the Bible. And he said, well, you use private judgment too when you decide for yourself that, you know, the claims of the church, the Catholic Church, are true. You're using private judgment for that, right? So to me, it's like apples and oranges. It's like, yeah, I'm choosing to relinquish control. I'm no longer the Pope. I'm submitting to the authority of something outside of myself. Whereas the Protestants haven't relinquished that control yet. They are the final say. They are the final arbiters of truth. They are the living magisterium. And I'm not sure if I communicated this to him or not, but how would you communicate the difference because you're a fallible man too, Chris, and you're submitting to the church, and
Yeah.
you could be wrong about Jesus Christ and his church. You could be wrong. It's a leap of faith that you
Yeah.
took. I think we have good motives of credibility to take that leap, but can you just sort of paint a picture about why it's different? The private judgment that you use to decide to submit to the church is different from the private judgment that the Protestants bring to bear on interpreting the scriptures in contradiction to the church.
Yeah, I think he's just thinking about this right now off the cuff. I think there's a big category error here where both the questions are being posed as if they're equals. They're not. If you think about an author who writes a book, what the author writes in the book and what he means by the things he writes is a completely different question than did the author write this book and where did he write it and when did he write it and how did he get it published? Those are two different questions. With the Catholic Church, there's the question of does the church have the authority that it claims that it has? One of the big things that settled this for me was that it precedes the church. It precedes the Bible. We talked about St. Augustine earlier, St. Augustine. I always get that mixed up. I used to live in St.
Either
Augustine,
or.
but I think, yeah. He said that he wouldn't even believe the scriptures had it not been for the Catholic Church. So I just had somebody on Twitter the other day, and look, I get a little bit rubbed the wrong way because sometimes these people, the fundamentalist Protestants, and I know them very well because I came from this, all my family is this, they come at you with such confidence and such absolute certitude, and yet they haven't done the homework. So I had like a guy telling me the other day that that idea that the Catholic Church preceded the Bible is completely false because there is an Old Testament before the New Testament. And he tells me that he's completely researched on the Bible. Really, because like what Old Testament, there wasn't like a book that was half the size of the Bible we have today being carried around by all the Jews. Which Jews are we talking about? Some of the Jews only accepted the Torah. Some of them accepted the Torah and the Psalms. Some of them accepted all the additional books that we accept as Catholics. There is a wide range of what was considered the Old Testament, and it was only the Old Testament once we determined the New Testament. To me, the question that your friend was asking seems to be a different question than what does. So my infallible decision to follow the church comes from me using my reason. I can go back in history and look at the evidence and say what makes the most reasonable claim here. Is the church true or is it not? And I was just thoroughly convinced. Even if you discount everything else, just the fact that you have people still practicing the faith today in all these other places in the world, and they do it somewhat apart from each other, and yet they have the same form, same structure, and you see that echoed when you go back and you read the historical documents that they were doing the same thing back then. I mean, you have to just ask yourself at what point do you give assent? And I mean, I couldn't make my way around the evidence. It was just too strong, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I just want to give you a little outline of sort of my way of thinking when it comes to ecumenism and bringing people into monotheism and Christianity and then the fullness of Christianity, Catholicism. For me, the first step to go from atheism to monotheism just involves reason. We don't need any faith. We just can look at causality and we can figure it out from there using our pure reason if God has blessed us with a normal intellect. And it says in my little handy Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma that a normal healthy adult cannot remain agnostic or atheist. So it's within our reach, it's within our reach to come to know and understand that God exists and many of the attributes of God. He's infinite in every pure perfection and so on and so forth. Okay, that's step one. And then once you're a monotheist, there aren't that many options in terms of monotheistic religions. Now you can stick with your own generic monotheism. Yes, I worship the uncaused first cause, but I don't know anyone that does that, because when I became a generic monotheist, I was compelled by God, not by Satan, but by God, I was compelled to publicly worship God. I had to find a religion. So, I hated Christianity at that time, so I didn't want to be Christian. That's the last thing I wanted. But, my studies led me to Christianity.
Right.
So once you become a Christian because of history, it's really by looking at history. What did the Jews say about the Messiah? What did the Muslims say about the Messiah? And what does Christianity say about the Messiah? And spoiler alert, it's very, very easy to compare those stories and figure out which one's the true religion, okay? But then once you're Christian, it's like, the Christians, they love Jesus, they love the Bible, but, what is the Bible and what's the canon? And is it inerrant? And if so, by what authority was it defined, and these sorts of things. So I'm just sort of outlining my approach to talking with non-Catholic Christians or non-Christians or even non-monotheists, like in terms of what's essential to take that next step. But there's a question here that I have for you. The question is, which Christian denominations, for lack of a better term, which Christian denominations, other than Catholic, are claiming a God-given charism of infallibility? Which ones? Do you know of any?
No, I don't. And in addition to that, not only do we claim that, but we claim it comes from God himself.
Yeah.
I don't know of anybody
The
else
Orthodox don't do that?
who says that.
The Orthodox don't do that? I suspect they do.
That's a good question. They don't believe in infallibility.
Oh, they don't?
Because they recognize no.
Oh.
No, that's one of their problems. In fact, if you were to convert to Eastern Orthodox from being Catholic, one of the things they're going to make you do is renounce the fact that the Pope is infallible, I believe. I might be wrong about that, but
really?
But I remember coming across that. No, because they see Peter as one of among equals.
But
he shares.
Yeah, well, I mean, leaving aside all the nitty-gritty details,
I don't know that.
If we just step back and say, hey, wait, we know that God is real. We know that he's infinite in every pure perfection. We know that he's infallible. We know he doesn't make any mistakes. And we also know that, because he's infinitely good, he wants us to have access to the saving truths, right, of faith and morals. We know that using our reason. Yeah. So how can you reconcile that fact with this story that God has left us orphans and in a state we're mired in agnosticism and there's no way out? How do you reconcile those two?
Yeah. I'm glad you're saying this, because this is exactly what used to frustrate me to no end in my upbringing, was that we were all just making this up. I could read something and think one thing, and one of my relatives could read something and think a completely different thing. And what are we just going to like bash heads until one of us wins by pure brute force? I mean,
or you have your truth, I have my truth, right? You have your truth, I have my truth.
You're right. Right.
Relativism.
Right. And then what's Christianity? It's schizophrenic. Yeah.
It just seems obvious. Like, I mean, I'm guilty of triumphalism because I'm so enamored by Christ and his church. And they are one flesh, as St. Paul says. This is what I always like to say with my non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Christ and his church are one flesh. It's a deep mystery. And if you're Christian, if you're telling me that you're Christian, you have to admit that Christ, the God-man, Jesus Christ, built a church, one church, not 40,000, and that church is the pillar and foundation of the truth. And he promised not to leave us orphans. He said, it's better if you go, because if I don't go, I won't send you the Holy Spirit. It's like, what do you need? What more do you need to know and recognize the church?
David, this is what is so. This is why I get frustrated. I get frustrated because I see people trying so hard to reject this, and it's like, why? This is all a gift from God. Now, I know some people have these obstacles in their head that they just can't get around. I mean, I get it. I had some of those myself. But once you start to, like to your point, if you believe that God, became incarnate and established a church, and that church is still being given life through him, through the one body that you're talking about, Like, it just wouldn't make any sense. Like, why? Yeah, he did not leave us orphans. The other thing is, one of the big things that converted me was finding out about typology. So if you consider typology, I mean, there is somewhat of an infallible authority in the Old Testament. They sit on the seat of Moses. The Old Testament's a template for the New. Why would it be any less than that? Why would it be any less? So, I mean, and when Jesus sends the apostles, he says, go and teach everything that I've commanded you. He tells them to forgive sins. He's giving his full authority to them. He who hears you hears me. Now, for Protestant fundamentalists who take every word of the Bible literally, and they take it so seriously, he who hears you hears me, and I'll be with you until the end of the age. Well, where is he now? Where is he? He's in the Catholic Church through the succession of the successor of St. Peter. I mean, St. Peter was the biggest obstacle that just sealed my ascent to Catholicism. Like, once I wrapped my head around the fact that, oh, Christ came, he picked someone to lead his church, he was going to give them infallibility, there would be one voice that would speak for the body. I mean, that just made the most sense to me. It's the most reasonable, it's the most loving, it's what you would expect a God who loves you to have done.
It's amazing, the appreciation that I have for the church. You may not, may not see it. If you look at my day-to-day life, you might just think that I'm, neglecting the graces that I have, and it's true. But, intellectually, at least intellectually, I'm so appreciative to have the church and the richness that we have in the church, not only in terms of the writings and the culture and the art and the music and hospitals and education system and everything else, but in terms of the mystical, the vertical component of the church, it's a mystical thing. To understand, like in the Eastern Orthodox, they emphasize the mysteries, maybe to the exclusion of some rational stuff that we can know that they reject or whatever, like infallibility. But the mystery of God, the unknowability of God, and the mystery of the sacraments. I think actually the word sacrament and mystery are synonymous. Is that not correct? The sacraments are known as mysteries. They're known as mysteries, aren't they?
Yeah.
Do you remember the story of the Septuagint? Like, it seems like a magical sort of story. I don't know if it's exaggerated, the legendary story about the Septuagint, the translation and that sort of thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but does the Catholic Church put more emphasis on the Septuagint translation than other Christian denominations? Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, some of the details here are a little foggy for me, but the Septuagint had been widely used since the beginning. In fact, if you go and for people that can speak the languages and look at the text, I think I've heard that most of what Jesus says can be traced back to the Septuagint, just based on some of the references, some of the exact word usage that he uses. Things like that. So, I mean, it had been there. It had been there since the beginning, and I think the first time that you see it kind of get. Now, there was some debate when they just settled the canon about what books of the Bible should be there. Some debated the Septuagint, but some debated some of the books that we include in the New Testament today. So there was a lot of different voices on that, but it was once the one voice of the church spoke, that was really sealed. And I don't think, as far as I don't know of anybody who's really systematically done away with the Septuagint until Luther. I mean, did he cut it out, or did he put it in the appendix? There's an author, Philip Campbell, who wrote a book on him, and he's the one to ask about stuff like that. Huh. But I think he got rid of it. He also got rid of some of the New Testament, but he might have put it as an appendix. And for the longest time, a lot of those Protestant sects kept it in there as in the appendix, and it was only in like the 19th century or so that a lot of the mainline, like Anglicans, I only know just enough to not make this a sure thing, what I'm telling you right now, so people can go fact check me. But it was only until like the 19th century that they took some of those apocryphal books out.
Yeah. Well,
completely.
I'm more impressed when I ask you a question like this out of the blue. I'm not expecting you to be an all knowing, but you have an impression. This is the most
Okay, good.
important. This is the most important thing is you have an impression and you have certain impressions, and those are valid even if you're wrong. Like even if you're wrong, it's still valid. That's the impression you have, right? And you can correct yourself in 5 minutes. Like,
Sure.
oh, I
Yeah.
just realized what I said before. Whatever. So it's not about it's about the truth, but it's more just about your impression and the emphasis. And one of the
Hmm.
things I emphasize in my podcast or whatever it is, one of the things I emphasize is that even in the Catholic Church, which defined the canon and gave us our Bible and is authorized to interpret infallibly, although rarely, certain passages of the Bible, even the Catholic Church doesn't claim to have. It makes a lot of wild claims, but the one wild claim it doesn't make, thank God, is to have the original writings of all of the books of the Bible. It doesn't make that claim. It claims that the Vulgate translation, one of the historic Vulgate at the time of Trent, it excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. It makes the weak claim, the very weak claim, that the Vulgate is safe. It's a safe translation. It's safe. You won't go far astray if you stick to the Vulgate.
Hmm.
That's a very weak claim. And if I can guarantee you that if we,
Yeah.
the Catholics or the Orthodox or any Protestant sect, if anyone had the original writings all together, perfectly intact, without any omissions or any errors or anything added, that's big news, and it wouldn't be a secret. It wouldn't be hidden away somewhere. They would be shouting it from the rooftops, like, "Hey guys, you could put away all those faulty copies of those faulty, manuscripts and all the faulty translations, because I got the original one here." So the fact that the church doesn't claim to have the originals, and that it claims, honestly and humbly, that we just have faulty copies of faulty manuscripts and faulty translations of those copies, that fact, what does it tell us? What does it tell us about the living magisterium? It tells us that it's a mystical thing. It's the charism of infallibility is not a rational project. It's not a rational project. It's a super rational project. It's a spiritual project. It's a supernatural project.
Supernatural. Yeah.
And that we have access.
Yeah.
The church has access to the truths, the true saving truths of Jesus Christ when he walked the earth and when he spoke, and everything he spoke was not written because the world could not contain the books. But the church has a mystical access to the truths of the sacred deposit of faith, scripture and tradition. But that access is a mystical thing. It's a
Hmm.
supernatural thing. So I want you to comment on that.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree completely. And the other thing is, I think sometimes Christians make the faith. The faith is extremely. It's difficult to live, but it's extremely simple. It's not. So the church doesn't need to come out and dogmatize every single sentence in the Bible about what exactly it means. That's not the point. I mean, we know how the church tells us about the sacramental life. It tells us how to live our life. But yeah, other than that, well, the problem is when people start deciding for themselves that they're gonna change the meaning or take books out of the Bible, or I mean, that's where it all eventually you're going to get infallibility somewhere. Somebody somewhere is going to say, no, I'm the infallible source here. And what makes the most sense, that was either dictated by God or that was dictated by ourselves. When Calvin went and tried to institute his new theology, he had people all over the place about what they believed, and the only way to kind of clamp things down was to basically make something that equated sort of his own inquisition, and he became the Pope and the arbiter of what was true and what wasn't. He became the Pope.
Yeah, every non-Catholic is their own pope, and some Catholics have made themselves their own pope, sadly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
you
Well,
know,
yeah.
but
That's true.
what one of my favorite citations from Saint Augustine is that Christians don't need the Bible. Christians do not need the Bible if they have faith, hope, and love. The Bible is just there to instruct other people. Like, it's like the Christians don't need it. So that's what St. Augustine said, because he understands that Christianity is deeper. Now, I'm not disparaging the Bible. The Vatican II talks very properly about the place of the sacred deposit of faith, including sacred scripture, and how it is the source. It is the source. It is the source. It's one of the two primary sources of our doctrine. Okay, but there is the spirit of there's a spirit in the letter, and a lot of people get fixated on the letter, even though they don't, like I've been saying, even though they don't have the letter, but they want to pretend like they have it. And they want to say, well, it's good enough, I think we have reliable certainty about the sources that we've pieced together and all these sorts of things. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I'm certain it's 99 point whatever accurate, the Bibles that we have, whatever. That's fine. I'm worried about the point whatever percent of error or omissions, because we can only interpret any part of scripture in the context of the entire scripture. And another citation from St. Augustine that I love is that if there's one error in the entirety of scripture, you may as well throw the whole thing into the garbage, because we'll never have certainty about anything, right? So once again, we are drawn inevitably to rely not on archaeology and all the trust the science and all this nonsense, this human fallible science. No, we are drawn to put our faith in the mystical living magisterium of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. Period. That's the only option. So
yeah, I mean, and St. Paul clearly states, Protestants love to point this verse out, that the Bible is good for teaching, good for reproof, good for I don't remember the exact quote. I'm sure you remember.
Edification. Or whatever.
Can identify the one I'm talking about. Edifying, yeah, it's edifying, and it is. It's all those things. I read scriptures to get deeper in my contemplation and meditation of the mysteries, to encounter Christ historically, and to encounter the church and the history there. But yeah, faith, hope, and love, that's what gets us to heaven. And of course, the sacraments and the life of grace are what, that's why everybody needs to be Catholic, because those are mystical graces that come straight from Christ himself, supernatural life. Why wouldn't you avail those if you could, if you knew? And to knock those things down to symbols completely does an injustice to even what the scripture says in the first place. So yeah, I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah, we won't dwell too much on this. I don't want to sound like I'm bashing my fellow Christians. I'm not, but I'm just astounded. I'm very astounded, and because you come from this fundy background, I thought you would have some sympathy for my frustrations, and it seems like you do. But even in an earthly relationship,
no, I do, and I just
yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, I agree with you. I might come out sounding very passionate about this issue. But it's just because I've encountered it for my entire life, and I'm eager for these fundamentalist Protestants, particularly because that's what I'm most familiar with, to just do the experiment. Just try and look at what Catholics are saying through the Catholic lens. Look at the sources that we're pulling out. Do it to prove us wrong. And then just try and determine what makes the most sense. Because one of the problems, I think, is they just don't know. They haven't been exposed to a lot of what Catholics believe, where we get our beliefs. And so just doing that experiment is going to raise all kinds of questions, not only about Catholicism, but about what they believe, I believe. And so I don't do it out of malice or anger. I really do it because I want them to encounter this amazing thing that I believe that I found in the Catholic Church. And if I believe it's true, why wouldn't I want someone else to encounter it as well?
Yeah, it's amazing. We're excited, we're passionate, if I'm allowed to speak for you. We're passionate because we want our brothers and sisters in the Lord who are separated from the fullness of the church to come in. Because like what I always say, they're already so far ahead of me in many other ways that I'm not going to be taking anything away from them. On the contrary, I'm adding to what they already have. Like, they're already better people than I am. So like, you could have more. You could still be yourself, and you could just have more. You could be more Christian. Don't you want that? It's all about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Like that's the irony of it, is like a lot of non-Catholic Christians say that we Catholics, and in some cases it's true, sadly, that we don't have that relationship with Jesus, but and that we're, relying on some rituals and some, legalism and external form of these sort of codified barnacles or whatever they want to call it. But the irony is that if you're interested in a living relationship with the Trinity, the Catholic Church is the place to be. And it's ironic that these so-called purists, Christians who want to strip everything down to the basic relationship with Jesus Christ, they've made an idol of the Bible. They've made an idol of their man-made traditions. They made an idol of their grotesque caricatures of Mary and Peter and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't want to bash them. I don't want to bash them too much, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't either. It's just it's sad because you want them to see it. You want them to see things how it really is, and sometimes it's like that. You can't force them to do it. Like at some point they just need that grace to search it out. And that's why I say, like, when I decided to become Catholic, or when it actually started to take root and I started to digest all the intellectual aspects of it, I read the enemies of Catholicism too, because I wanted to hear what everybody was saying about this. I was coming to it complete blank slate, and I wasn't just going to take it for granted. And I think that helped me a lot because, I wasn't just like, oh, well, the Catholics say this, it's got to be true. No, I wanted to hear what the Orthodox said. I wanted to hear what the Lutherans said. I wanted to hear what everybody said. And I just happened to find that the Catholics had the only consistently reasonable, trustworthy, practical answers to the questions that I was looking for. So.
Yeah, well, like I said, not that it's all about me, but when I came into the church, I was anti-Catholic, anti-Christian generally, and so I had a lot of questions, and every question that I asked, I was just pleasantly surprised. Like, it makes sense. I mean, a lot of the answers transcend my ability to comprehend. It was super rational, but it wasn't irrational. And so coming from, philosophically from a crazy journey that I was on before my conversion to God, I had certain rationalistic leanings where I was very dependent on, logic and reasoning and these sorts of things. Not to say that I was bright, but I valued those things, and I was going to compare and contrast everything that I was taught by my friend, the monk who led me into the faith. I was going to scrutinize everything very carefully and very jealously for God the Father, because I didn't believe in the Trinity. I didn't believe in the incarnation or anything like that when I entered the RCIA, and I had private instruction with this monk who was on his way to becoming a priest. So I was very much like you. I was open-minded and I was sort of antagonistic. I was not friendly to Christianity. I didn't want to be Christian, but I had the questions and they had the answers, and I was just very pleasantly surprised. And the lives of the saints played a very large role in that. And this is a good segue now into your favorite saints and your artwork. And so I'll let you gush a little bit about your favorite saints now, if you don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the saints are amazing. The ones I'm most attracted to were the ones really from the early periods of the church, the ones who really faced trial by fire, literally, and whose blood is the seed of the church. They're the most amazing to me. Saint Ignatius, Saint Polycarp, Saint Peter is my absolute favorite, because of that question I asked, just his role that Christ gave him, his personal character in the New Testament. I feel like I relate to him because I'm like I've always felt like I want to do the right thing, but I'm constantly doing the wrong thing, and I'm kind of like grappling with myself to be faithful, like Peter was. And but he eventually pulls it together and is faithful unto death. And I pray that will be the same for me. I just found a lot of strength and real grit and character in St. Peter. So he, of course, is probably my favorite. And of course, I'm attracted to a lot of the warrior saints, St. Louis, the Ninth, Joan of Arc,
Yeah.
There's Saint Francis. You see the Saint Francis who's always cuddling cute animals, and then you go and you read his history, and you're like, this is the guy that, all of the army in Egypt was scared to go and approach the Sultan because they were looking at their friends' heads up on pikes. And he's like, no, I'll do it. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. Like, where's that St. Francis in popular culture? Because those are the types of stories that just really inspire me to not live some cotton candy Catholicism, but really take it seriously and know that it's hard, but it's worth it, and to do it and to persevere in it, and hopefully we get that crown.
Did you like Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Jesuit founder?
So I don't know much about him other than he did go to battle. He had his
Yeah.
leg shot off, right? And then he was kind of sulking over that. I relate to that because when I got sick, I was kind of sulking myself. And he had that conversion while he was, on his bed.
Yeah.
And I relate to that a lot. So there are aspects, yeah, definitely I relate to him. It's kind of a shame what his order, what his legacy has turned into, but
yeah, it was troubled right from his death. But that's the case even with Saint Francis's order. That was troubled too at his death too. It's often the
That's
way, Satan loves to attack ecumenical councils before, during, and after, and saints before, during, and after, and these sorts of things. But Saint Ignatius of Loyola, he's one of my heroes among many, many, many. But he took a vow that was very manly, I should say, a very, very manly vow, and I'm scared. I'm sobered by just thinking about his simple vow that he took. Are you aware of the vow that he took on his own initiative?
No, I'm not. Now I'm curious.
He vowed, listen very carefully and think about what I'm saying. He vowed never to waste time. He vowed he would never again waste time. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Sounds simple, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. Actually, that sounds like a Herculean task.
Ooh, the balls on this guy. The balls on him to make that vow.
I am a master. Yeah. I'm a master of wasting time, unfortunately.
So he would not have been on Twitter. He would not have been on Twitter.
I know, and I'm not on Twitter that much, but I'm on it too much, so I need to be off of it myself.
What were you saying? You're a master of what? Confession. You said you had to go to confession
I'm a
because
master of wasting time. Sorry, I might be cutting out here. I had a little bit of a lag. No, I'm a master of wasting time. So, like, for me, that's a Herculean task to not waste time, and it's something I have to confess all the time. I don't know if it's because I'm just kind of like a creative type whose brain's always like a squirrel going in a million different directions, and it's hard for me to like sit down and focus intently and be present to what I'm doing. That's part of it, and I don't know, that might be a lifelong struggle for me. So I respect his that being his thing, because that is not easy.
Yeah. Wow.
And back in those days, he didn't have all the distractions we have now.
That's true. Yeah. But the whole question of virtue is also sobering to think about. Our little vices. We can allow ourselves a certain amount of pampering and vice, and we set our expectations a little bit lower when it comes to pursuing the virtues of patience or moderation or temperance or fortitude or whatever it might be. If I have a little pain, it's like I can make a big deal about it because I don't like pain. So obviously I'm gonna like make excuses for myself. Why am I complaining? Why am I making a big deal about it? Because it hurts, So it's just natural. The natural man, or lower natural nature, is very comfortable making excuses, being weak, and not striving seriously for virtue and indulging in vice. So, I'm just generally complaining about my lower human nature here, and I want to die to self and live in Christ, but it's just a theoretical project in my head at this point in time. I make little baby steps once in a while, make a little gesture like, "Hey, Jesus, I'm doing this for you," this little tiny thing or whatever. But just talk about virtue and vice and manliness of the Christian walk.
Yeah, well, I think my most permeating confrontation with this was, you know, on a hospital bed, losing half of one of my lungs, and not knowing what that was going to lead to. Not knowing if I had to have a couple months left, did I have a couple years left? I didn't know, didn't know what that was going to turn into, and that really that really forced me in that early period to take this stuff seriously and to really give everything, because to me it was like this, the sand dial was flipped upside down and I was down to my last grains is what it felt like. And I felt like, life was just going to be snatched away at any possible minute. And that was a terrifying thought. And so I really persisted in making my faith and making my sacrifices real, sacrifice constantly. And I did a fair job, considering, like I said earlier, what a wretched and lazy person I had been my entire life. I did a fair job at it, but what's scary to me is that now, this many years after, that lackadaisical,
Complacency.
it's too far in the past, and it's complacency, yeah, and it's starting to feel like, oh well, that's not real. I've got plenty more time, and I'm starting to. There'll be times where I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, death seems very real and very. I can. It's palpable. Like I can tell what it is. I can feel it. I can sense it. And it's a scary thought, because when I wake up in the morning, I don't have it anymore. And I wish I did, because it would keep me on the track. I'm kind of like one of those people that needs that fire under me. So I'll have these scary kind of glimpses at these things, which really scare me, to keep my life straight, keep it on track. But I'm also ashamed to say, like, how easily I just go off that. I have all the same vices that you probably have. All of the, I'm lazy. I'm a waste time, like we said. All of these things are just fighting for my soul. But Christ is fighting for my soul too, and it's important to remember that. But it's hard in the moment. It's hard in the moment.
How do you interpret the? I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward, but I'd like to get your insight anyway. You might have something unique to share. But it's good to think about, even if you're going to just regurgitate everything that I've always said about it anyway. But when Christ said you have to be like a child, what does that mean for you? And what did your cancer teach you about being like a child?
That's a good question. There is, I don't know, I don't know how I want to phrase this, but there's like this mentality sort of in Catholicism to, um, it's just a place. It's a place of simplicity and complete divine surrender, like surrender to divine will. I mean, that's really what it is. It's being humble enough to know that I'm not here by my own will. That there is somewhere that I'm intended to go. That I'm given graces every moment of my life, like the smallest things that we just take for granted. I'm constantly great. Gratitude is probably one of the biggest things for me that I just recognize as just, it's in huge lack right now in the culture, in the church and everything. Just gratitude for these simple graces and gifts that we get every single day. And I think it's looking at that like a child does, with just pure simplicity. That, because what I was going to say was, there's like this tendency in Catholicism to have it like all under control and all according to the way that I'm going to do it. And God gives us that freedom. We can go to the sacraments if we want. We don't have to. You can go to confession if you want. He's not going to force you. He's not going to knock on your door and tell you it's time to go and take you over there. But you need to do it yourself. And if you're looking at this like a child and you see the gift that it is, like a child wants to run to a gift, you will run to it. So it's putting yourself in that perspective again. So yeah, I mean, that it's interesting because, and it's kind of scary because I know how much I am not like a child anymore, and it's I've kind of lost that, and it's something that you see the most holy, like saintly type people on earth, and they are like children in a beautiful way, right?
What
Yeah.
about the opposite of childhood innocence and purity, pornography? What is that a bit one of the biggest weapons that Satan is using against heaven?
Oh, absolutely. I can't. I literally cannot think of anything worse, and it goes hand in hand with abortion.
Yeah,
But they're all connected. So birth control, abortion,
divorce.
pornography, divorce, all of the weird gendered stuff that's going on, all of the just all of it. It's all linked and it's all connected to this perversion of what it is to be a human, what it is to be a man, woman, what it is to have a soul and a body, to be a composite of the two, and to use them properly and ordered towards their true end. All of this stuff goes hand in hand, and I can't think of a worse weapon than that because it looks appealing. It looks like um, appetizing. You want to go after it. It looks like it's going to be a good thing, and it's just completely rots you out, right? And we see. Look, I can't even. I've talked to some of my friends about this. When I was younger, you would never admit that you would look at that. You would never admit that to your friends. Like that was something you kept. Now you see it. People just talk about it in commonplace. It's on movies. It's on TV. It's made. Jokes are made of it. People just talk about it out in public. You see it in public.
The shame is gone.
Um, so it's gone. Yeah. And I was talking about this on Twitter recently. Shame is gone, and no one's holding these people accountable anymore. And I believe that you were talking about what it means to be a Catholic man. The men need to step up because they're the ones who are propagating this stuff and shut it down. Like it's just, where are the strong men attacking it? And I say that as I'm an artist who's not strong on that myself. I'm not going out. I don't know how to do it, honestly. It seems so out of hand. I don't even know if it's possible anymore. It just seems like it's gotten so out of control. I hear about kids being exposed to these sorts of things, in elementary school. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's the most perverse thing.
It's dark. It's very dark. Um,
It is.
Someone asked on Twitter, just an open question. It said, name a conspiracy theory that you believe in. And I said, I believe in the Holocaust of abortion.
Yeah.
To me, I get confused sometimes by all the right-wing conspiracy theories because, since COVID, I've been sort of peeking under that rock of the sort of alt-right and the right wing and sort of the conspiracy theories that they come up with. A lot of them are, I think, valid, and a lot of them are just satanic. But there are a lot of interesting ones, and I do believe in a lot of them, like 9/11 and 2020 election and stuff like that. I'm not allowed to talk about that, but I might lose my YouTube channel. But in any case, I believe in some of them to a certain extent. And the whole COVID thing, that's high on my list too. But when it comes to sitting back and saying, okay, David, am I buying into a bunch of satanic lies where Satan wants me to go down this rabbit hole and that rabbit hole and the other thing, as a distraction from what's really important, which is, getting right with God? Yeah, probably. So I go back to what is the reality? What is sort of what is the darkest thing that I know 100% is real? And the darkest thing that I think of is abortion. And it's just like I can be sober and alert and awake and realize that I live in a world where we're slaughtering the unborn and the elderly. Here in Canada, here in Quebec, I don't know if we're like a leader of killing people with medically assisted suicide. We're the leaders. It's like 7%, a full 7% of people who died last year or whatever died by medically assisted suicide. It's like, what is going on? So all of this to say that I don't need to get excited about this conspiracy theory or that conspiracy theory when I have abortion and euthanasia being openly bragged about, and the numbers are not hidden, and the motivations are not hidden, everything's right out in the open. So we could just focus on that, you know?
No, the devil's attacking on every single front right now. I mean, he's attacking on the spiritual front, the things that you can't see that are just rotting your soul out. Popular entertainment, pornography, like you're talking about, drug abuse, these sorts of things. And then he's attacking on that material and the material reality too, of just the senseless slaughtering of the most innocent in our culture. I mean, this is just another reason why I'm totally convinced by Christianity, is because you just see the same stuff repeating. We're just living in the we are living in the Old Testament template again.
Yeah.
And it's like a rubber band effect, you know. It's like it started with all this perversity, and then Christ came, and now it's like rubber banding. We're just going right back to it. And that's the efforts of the devil. I mean, and he doesn't sleep. He roars like a prowling lion, or prowls like a roaring lion, and constantly doing battle.
It's so.
Imagine being God. Imagine being God and having this timeless look over space and time. That's redundant. this he just seeing everything for what it is, and seeing all of this horror in one glimpse. I can't even imagine. I can see why he's angry and lamenting in the Old Testament, because to see your own creatures doing this to themselves and to others, I can't even imagine.
It's amazing sometimes when I think about, and I guess I'll preface this rant by asking you a question. I'm a young Earth creationist. I think the whole universe is about 7,000 years old. You were raised fundamentalist, so it seems like you might have been exposed to that as a child. Maybe you've rejected that, but where do you stand with evolution, Darwinian evolution?
Yeah, that was what we were raised with, and I rejected it because I bought into all of the stuff that's out there in public schools, and then it's just any other view other than the evolutionary view was just untenable in those environments. But now that I'm Catholic, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. There's two things I don't think about too much, and maybe I should. Maybe it would be good for me, but I don't think about where we came from, and I don't think about heaven. Heaven, I cannot even grasp or comprehend how heaven will be, and I start to get myself bogged down on all of these very human, mundane aspects that don't make sense to me, and then I'm like, just stop. It's not good for me. And it's kind of like that with evolution. I would love to believe the Genesis account.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about evolution, and I don't know enough. There's the Genesis account, and then there's all the stuff we're supposed to know about evolution. But seriously, how does anybody know that anyway? Now, if God wanted to do it that way, and he wanted to use material over time to change and bring about creation, I could see there being a beauty in that too. But I think the Genesis account would be the most beautiful.
Yeah, well, you talked about Satan attacking the family and attacking what is human nature, what is a male, what is a female, these sorts of things. Well, evolution is philosophically untenable. You don't even need religion. You just need to know the metaphysical principles that it violates blatantly, like the principle of proportionate causality, and you'll just reject it out of hand. And the religious icing on that cake is that you no longer need to believe that the Blessed Virgin Mary was an ape, because that's what evolution teaches, that she was an ape and a fish, also a fish, and a worm. And so you don't have to believe that. You can embrace the Christian teaching, which is that the Blessed Virgin Mary is human, and she's not an ape, she's not a fish, she's not a worm, she's not a prokaryote, she's a human. And you cannot get a human from an ape.
I get what you're saying here, and you know a lot more about this stuff than I do. It sounds like you've read into this more, but I don't. The way that I would understand evolution, and again, I'm not saying I hold to this. I couldn't even begin to talk enough about evolution to even hold the view. But my understanding in the Catholic sense, because of saying that evolution was. I don't remember what document it was where they said that it was a possibility. I don't think that automatically means like the Virgin Mary would have been an ape. The Virgin Mary would have been the Virgin Mary. Whatever was an ape or a fish or whatever, that was some other creature.
No, no,
When
no, no.
God
But
created
the
the Virgin
science,
Mary, he created.
the science of evolution, so-called science,
Mhm.
says that we are members of every clade from which we evolved. Every clade. I don't know if you know what clades are, but it's this classification system. It's like if you go through your utensil
Okay.
drawer and you point out all the common features of what a spoon and a knife and a fork, and you start saying which one evolved from which other one, because they have common features, right?
Yeah.
You could do that. It's fun. And it's this, stimulating exercise, but it's nonsense. But when it comes,
let me ask.
yeah, go ahead.
Because this. Well, so if God created the Virgin Mary out of would you hold it that he created her out of the material of the earth?
The Blessed Virgin Mary?
Yeah.
Well, she was conceived in the womb of her mother, right? Immaculately conceived in the womb of her mother by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said the Virgin Mary. Sorry. You were talking about the Virgin Mary. I meant Eve.
Okay, yeah. Eve, I believe that Eve was built up from the side of Adam while he slept. That's what I believe. So,
and Adam was made from the material of the earth.
Yeah,
right?
and the document that you're referring to, the papal letter that you're referring to, it allows for investigation into special transformism, which says that Adam's body may have been transformed from other material or whatever, provided that we say that his soul was infused supernaturally or whatever. Okay, created supernaturally. But this was sort of like a very cautious and tentative permission to investigate it from both sides of the question and to not assume that it's settled science or anything like that. And then ever since that letter was written, everyone's like, oh, see, we have the permission of the church. Like the church says it's okay. We can be, pro-evolution and all this sort of thing. It's complete nonsense. But I want to come back to something that's even more shocking and it may tip the scales for you because you don't need any knowledge of natural science or metaphysics. If you read Saint Maximilian Kolbe and how he talks about the Immaculate Conception, this is how I became a young Earth creationist. It's because of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. If Adam were conceived in the womb of any creature, whatever it is, he was necessarily conceived without sin because he didn't sin as a single-celled organism. He sinned as a full-grown man.
Right.
Okay, and I also believe that he was formed.
Adam, yeah.
I believe he was formed as a full-grown adult, by the way, and I believe he fell on the first day that he was created. But that's the tradition. But if he was conceived without sin, so he is an immaculate conception. And that Saint Maximilian Kolbe, he could be wrong, but Saint Maximilian Kolbe says it cannot be. It cannot be, because the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's a dogma that it's a unique privilege that she had. It's a unique privilege that she had. There's one Immaculate Conception. It's the Blessed Virgin Mary. So that's a slam dunk for me. Also, we have the dogma that God created a good world, so there wasn't death and disease before the fall. And we have the dogma that the soul, the human soul, is the form of the human body. And this flies in the face of evolution because of this question of natures. And then we have the dogma of transubstantiation. That's another Aristotelian definition with these categories of form and matter and the soul being the form of the body and these sorts of things. Transubstantiation violates every form of evolution that there is. The only thing that the theistic evolutionists do is they just start having miracles, I guess, at every stage. To keep intact the metaphysics and the Catholic dogmas, and also the to fit in with society and not to raise any eyebrows at that fancy dinner party that they go to or whatever. They want to save face. They want to be worldly.
Yeah. I like what you're saying. I mean, I don't. I would lean more towards wanting that to be true,
Yeah.
but I have no idea, and I will drive myself nuts trying to figure it out. I guess what I get hung up on is whether God took the material and he spread it out over a million years. I don't even know what the timeline they say is, but they spread it out over millions of years, or he did it in the blink of an eye. He's still using his own creation. He's still using his own material. And what you said about transubstantiation would seem to make it at least possible, because in transubstantiation you have somebody producing the wheat, right, the bread, putting the bread into the host, but you have God's changing transubstantiation. It's changing into Christ and become something completely different from something that was pre-made. I don't see why, if evolution were true, and again, I think all the stuff with Darwin was even frustrated that he couldn't get all the details of his theory nailed down. He was getting angry. His letters where he's telling people, "Don't you know how hard it is to convince people of this theory? Why are you making it more difficult for me?" So I mean, I don't hold it tenable, but it just seems to me that I think there could be ways where it would work, where the Virgin Mary wasn't an ape, or some new creation came from matter at some point in time. I don't know. This is just me as a creative just thinking about it. But like I said, it'll drive me nuts if I try and like pin down some. I can't wait to find out. I hope God shows us like a whole rewind of history when we get to heaven.
Yeah, oh yeah. Don't worry about that. Yeah, for
and
sure.
I would love to see, Adam and Eve being formed in the garden and one day and all that happening like the Bible. I'd be like, man, that's amazing. Why couldn't I? Yeah.
We're going to get to see everything on Judgment Day, everything. And for those of us who make it, God willing, into heaven, I mean, what a beautiful, beautiful story. Every part of the story will be beautiful because we'll be in God's good graces. And for the reprobates, for those who end up damned, sadly, tragically, by their own choice, every single aspect of the story will be so painful, filled with regret and remorse, and most of all, hatred of their creator, hatred of themselves for rejecting their all good creator. So let's try to be on the right team. Let's try to make it to heaven so that we can enjoy Judgment Day, because it's outside of time, but it will contain all of time. God is the master of time, and he's going to show us space-time and how everything played out and how he was doing everything, dynamically optimized, maximally optimized for your greatest good, my greatest good, Hitler's greatest good, everyone, all the most nasty characters in history. And hopefully some of them had a change of heart and said yes to God's graces and will end up in heaven with us, right? Are you disturbed by the doctrine of an eternal hell? Or you're pretty comfortable with it, or you just don't think about it?
Yeah, I'm not disturbed by it, because I also don't think about time the way that I think some people do. I think people think about eternity as in like you're living
a long time,
an infinite amount of days and hours and minutes, and it's just, I don't see eternity like that. Eternity is non-change. It's you've become something, and you're set in that state, and it just it's like, it's hard to comprehend, but it's like, it's something different than the way we experience time, I think, now. And so when you think about hell, it's being permanent in a state of rejection of God. Now, whether that means literal fire or not, I don't know. I mean, I would think just the fact that you would be able to know what you had in life and what you rejected in God, that alone would be a fire that would be consuming you from the inside as you would think about that. What an absolute disaster of a choice that was. So yeah, I don't know. And I know the new big thing now is annihilationism. It seems like people are talking about that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, I don't, what, that doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't make any sense, especially when
I'm sorry, not annihilationism.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Jesus said it would have been better if he'd never been born, about Judas. And if annihilationism were true, then that would be a lie.
Yeah. I didn't mean, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't mean to say annihilationism. That one's actually easier to dismiss. But the, what is it? It starts with a U.
Universalism.
David Hart Bentley.
Universalism.
Universalism. Yeah. yeah, yeah. That one,
Yeah, that's nasty.
I've heard a lot of people being swayed by that, but I just don't. I don't. It doesn't square with me when I read scripture.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't square with natural law and morality. Like, I mean, if we end up in the good place, no matter what we do, you know, I don't strive for virtue as much as I should, but I strive a lot more than I would if universalism were the case.
Yeah,
Believe me,
yeah, yeah.
believe me. I'm, you know, my little efforts are my little efforts are there because, you know, morality is real, hell is real, it's eternal, you can't get out. Like, I mean, that's for sure 100% guaranteed, you know.
Right, right, right.
Were you
Yeah.
gesturing at something behind you? Or were you pointing out something behind you there?
No, I thought I heard somebody coming in, but I don't know.
Well, we're gonna wrap it up
Did you
here.
see any? I didn't.
We're
Okay.
gonna wrap it up here, but I'll have you back again. There is a little bit of a delay, which made our conversation a little bit awkward sometimes, but it's just because of that delay.
Yeah,
But I'm surprised
yeah.
that your internet connection was pretty good, and we didn't lose you,
Good.
and we can see your face. It's a little bit fuzzy, but
Yeah.
it all worked out. And I hope you come back again. Well, I have a lot more questions to ask you, but I gotta go, and I gotta go meet the wife. Speaking of the wife, ask your wife if
Yeah.
she'll come and talk to me and give her side of the story with her own faith, her ongoing conversion story and her faith journey. And please do me a favor, just ask her if she'll come and chat to me one day, okay?
Yeah. I'll ask her. That's going to be a tough sell, but she doesn't like to be public.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it's always a tough sell. It's
yeah,
always a
no,
tough
this was
sell.
great. Yeah, no, this was great though. You've got very interesting questions. You know, I listened to a lot of your other
Thank you.
interviews, and it's something a little bit different, and I like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I appreciate you inviting me on and having this chat. And I'm glad my antiquated 1980s level internet here was
Dial
able
up.
to keep the connection going. Yeah.
Can you hold one of your creations up in front of the screen so we can see some of your artwork? And I put the link already to your website, but can you hold up a T-shirt or something? What do you got there?
Yeah, let's see. I got all this. This is our stock room right here, actually, that I'm in,
Ah,
which is the lighting's not great, so that's probably why it looks fuzzy. But I make a
oh,
lot of these holy cars with. I try and embellish them
wow,
with some metallics and get some cool
wow,
reflectivity there.
wow. Next time I
So
want to
there's
talk to you.
Stella Maris.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about the apparitions next time.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm not a big apparition guy. I don't know if that's
Okay.
because of um I don't know. That's like the last thing to learn in
Yeah,
Catholicism for
yeah,
me. I
yeah.
feel like there's so many
It's
other things
non-essential. It's
that
non-essential.
but
Don't worry about
like
it.
the ones like Fatima are, yeah, it's non-essential, yeah, but Fatima's very interesting to me. That one and a couple of the other ones are very interesting. I do believe them. You know, the Our Lady of Zaytun, that's an interesting one because it's
Uh-huh.
actually videoed.
Ah, yeah.
You can
There's
watch it.
yeah.
Now the Catholic Church doesn't say that that's legit because it's in the territory of the Copts, but they don't say it's not legit. They don't pronounce on it, but the Copts say it's legit, and the video is very interesting.
You
Yeah,
have any opinion about Medjugorje?
I don't know enough about it, but just the way that I hear people kind of like cultishly talk about it, I'm skeptical. I don't I it kind of weirds me out. So I don't need to look into it.
Yeah,
I could spend the rest of my life reading scripture and reading the church fathers and church history. I really don't need anything other than that.
yeah. You don't even need the scriptures. You just need faith, hope, and charity.
Yeah, well, yeah. No, I read the scriptures out of an enjoyment and out of an interest. But yeah, you're right. I don't need them.
Well, we need them. I guess we
They're
need.
definitely a help to me,
I
though.
guess we need them. We do need them to the extent that we lack faith, hope, and charity. So we do even we Christians. We
Yeah.
still most of us aren't saints yet or whatever. So
Yeah. Right.
work in progress. So I don't know if you've watched a couple of my shows, you might know that I enroll all my guests in a perpetual mass. So you got those graces coming your way, you and your family. That includes your spouse and two kids and your parents, any siblings you have, your two brothers, I guess, living or dead, right? So you have that, and so in exchange, just try to remember me and mine, in your prayers, and I appreciate it.
I will. I got to give full credit to all 5 of my kids, though. So I guess they're all enrolled in that.
Oh,
huh?
you have 5 kids now?
We had three came after the
Oh,
whole
really?
health issues. So yeah.
Oh, no way.
So hope that, yeah.
So you're spreading these graces thin now. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That's the beauty of love. The more you divide it, the more there is for everyone, right?
That's right.
Same thing with grace. So real
Well, thank
pleasure
you. That's
to meet
very
you.
kind of you to do that. I
Yeah.
definitely need the graces. I definitely need them, and especially keeping my family.
Yeah.
Being an example for my family.
Yeah.
I could.
Are your 5 kids Catholic?
Oh yeah. They're all. My oldest is just a teenager, so down to a toddler. So they're all Catholic because we're Catholic, and that's what we do.
Excellent. So give my love to your wife and kids there, and we'll keep in touch. And come back anytime. Okay, we'll chat some more about the beautiful faith.
All right, David.
God bless you.
Yeah, definitely.
Take good care.
Great talking to you. Nice to meet you.
Great talking to you. Bye bye.
God bless you.
God bless. Bye bye.
All right. God bless.